Welcome to Exploring the Mystical Side of Life with your host, Linda Lang.
Hi, this is Linda Lang from ThoughtChange.com. On my journey to understand myself more fully, one of the tools that came across my path was human design, and I found it a really fascinating system. So I have John Cole here from metamorphichumandesign.com, and he's going to share some human design magic with us. Hi, John.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure, and I'm really excited for this conversation. So for the listeners who've never heard of human design, can you give us a really kind of quick snapshot of what it is?
Sure. I think probably the simplest way to say it is it's a system of knowledge that can be used to awaken to oneself, to align with the gifts that we come in the world with, and to understand how our energy works and how to best move through life without unnecessary resistance, to get into more of a flow state with life. And the other thing I'd just like to add real quick is a lot of it is about reconnecting with our bodies, with our form consciousness.
It's a merging of a few systems as well. Is that not correct?
It is correct. It's a synthesis of quite a few systems. I guess the most obvious one is astrology. Human design is based on a birth chart that is the time and place and date of birth, and with the idea that there's an imprinting that happens at that time. And it also combines the I Ching, the Chinese book of change. So, we're used to looking at astrology and seeing like the signs of the zodiac. Human design has kind of a different way of dividing up the wheel, the mandala, which is through the 64 hexagrams of the I Ching, this ancient Chinese text. And
it is absolutely fascinating. That's for sure. I know when I got my profile and read it, I thought, wow, it was pretty accurate for me.
That's usually how it hits. I think once, that was my experience as well, is like it described things about my life and myself that I had either noticed or felt over the years, but I didn't really have a point of reference for. And so it was kind of a validation or confirmation of just what I had been observing in my own life, but then it brought a lot more perspective to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And even the places where things aren't working so well, or maybe repetitive patterns, that it gives you suggestions of how to make better choices or strategies to live your life is a real benefit as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's probably the biggest gift of that knowledge is, what's referred to as, strategy in human design, which is a recommended way of moving through life where we can align with our true nature and, and again, kind of reduce unnecessary friction, resistance, frustration, and get into this more of a flow state.
So, John, what happens if people don't know their birth time?
Well, that's a good question. There are some very time-sensitive things in the birth chart, which is called a body graph in human design. So without an accurate birth time, you're going to be a little bit limited on how deep you can go into that system. But even when you don't have an accurate birth time, if you can narrow it down to just several hours, you can still get about 70% of the knowledge or, of the picture. And so an accurate birth time is very helpful, but if it's just not available, there are ways of working around it.
So why don't you share some of the possibilities that can enlighten people about their path?
Sure. One of the first things that is often encountered in human design is something that's referred to as your type. And that's really referring to your auric or energetic type, how your unique energy field, your bioenergetic field that we all have and carry around is really set into a certain pattern. And from that, we get what we were just referring to, this concept of strategy, which is kind of a recommended way of entering into things or moving through life. So that's one of the first things that we get out of human design. We can also see where we have, I would say, what parts of us are reliable and fixed and consistent in our experience, like how our energy is fixed into a certain pattern in more specific ways. And then that's in contrast with what is open or conditional or temporary in our experience. And so that becomes a pretty huge deal. It's simple to say, but we're basically talking about what part of us we can rely on versus where we're going to be most easily influenced by others or by our culture, and where we're going to be most receptive, in our own bodies, in our own minds. And so that's a pretty big topic there too.
Pretty big topic is right. And there are certain gifts available to us as well.
Absolutely. And that's really what this system of knowledge is about, to me, is aligning with those gifts and our true nature, our authentic nature. And it can bring us to this place of really self-love, where we are just honoring who we are and living from that place. And that can be very freeing. It can be very validating and freeing, and it just opens up really a whole new way of moving through the world. And a lot of that's based on that imprinting that happens at the time of birth.
One of the things that I found very interesting about human design is that it not only focuses on the birth time, but 3 months prior to the birth time in something that would be considered kind of unconscious patterning or programming, or the design that is with you on an unconscious level. And I found that really fascinating.
It truly is. And that's one of the departure points from traditional astrology, is that there are really two birth times used in human design. As you mentioned, there's the one that happens 3 months before the time of birth, which is the beginning of the third trimester of the pregnancy, when it's believed or thought that at that point the form was set. It was, kind of fixed genetically into what it was going to be. And the belief is that that's when the soul, or that part of us that comes back in, it's referred to as the personality crystal in human design, drops back into the form. And that represents our unconscious, and unconscious not in any negative sense, but how our form is imprinted and the traits and characteristics that our actual body has. And to me, that was fascinating to discover, and something I hadn't found in all of my studies with astrology, like where is the body? And
so would that be more like your natural way of being?
The way it's talked about is the birth time, the actual birth time, the date of birth represents our personality, the imprinting that our consciousness and our mind gets at that time. And it tends to be what we think we are, or what we would identify as ourselves, where the time prior 3 months in that chart, which is combined with the personality chart in the whole body graph, but the time before, that's really just saying, this is how my body works. This is how my body is imprinted, and the characteristics or gifts that it has, that it carries through life. And it kind of operates on its own. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to, it doesn't take our conscious intervention. I like to use an analogy of, it's kind of like our blood circulating or our hair growing. The body just does it. And then we kind of reflect on it later and go, oh, look, my hair's longer. Yeah, I'll go get a haircut.
And because it's on an unconscious level, we might not even be aware that we have those patterns or those gifts or challenges too, correct? It can tell you some of the challenges that might be on your path.
Yes. And we will tend to either take that for granted, the form or the consciousness of the body. In my view, our bodies have their own deep sense of intelligence, and these bodies that we've come into are a vehicle that is meant to take us through this life. But when we're constantly operating from a very mentally controlling or mentally dominant place, we tend to override that or ignore that or suppress that or just devalue it. And I think that's where we kind of will meet those challenges. We can kind of go off the rails there a little bit.
That we can. And that's one of the things I tell people too, is to kind of learn how to tap into that innate intelligence of the body, because it can give you such subtle but really important guidance, like instantaneously.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah.
So one of the things that everybody I've talked to about human design, they're always talking about the Incarnation Cross, 4 gates that make up this cross that are part of your life purpose.
Yes. So the Incarnation Cross is a fascinating topic and aspect of the system. It is based on the 4 gates. It's the positions of the sun and the earth on the personality side, so that moment of birth, and then the sun and the earth, which are always opposite to each other in the mandala or the wheel, on the design side or the unconscious side. And if you were to look at it kind of arranged around a mandala or the zodiac, you would see it was almost a 90-degree cross, 90-degree angle cross. It's actually 88 degrees. But what that represents is really the pattern that we incarnated with, and that we're ultimately here to express over the course of our life as our life purpose. It carries a lot of weight in the overall design. The sun is said to be about 70% of the influence of the planets in the solar system. And so we see that the Incarnation Cross becomes a very big theme because it is based on the position of the sun. So that's kind of the quick version of it.
Okay, John, what is your Incarnation Cross? What are you here to do?
Mine is it's called the Right Angle Cross of the Unexpected. And it's one of those that are some of these crosses are almost like Zen koans. You start trying to wrap your head around them and you're like, how does this actually work? And which is actually a really interesting point, because one of the things that's taught in the system is that you don't do your Incarnation Cross, it does you. And so in other words, the more we're living as ourselves, the more we find ourselves naturally expressing this purpose. And so the Right Angle Cross of the Unexpected is about kind of being this expression of the unexpected, both in how I'm interacting with life, but also in other people's lives. And so the way that can kind of play out in practice or in the more mundane is that I've experienced a series of just completely unexpected events that have been very pivotal in my life or the people who I'm close to or around me's life. And it's kind of interesting to kind of try to wrap my head around, like, well, what do you actually do with this? But that's just the point. You don't do anything with it. You just live it. And then it just starts coming through.
That's it. So it's not going to say you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer. It's more the pattern of what you're here to experience and express.
Yes. And you can see some of those other type of like traits or gifts or characteristics in other parts of the body graph and the design, where you could see that, okay, this person would be good at, guiding people, or would be more of a kind of a creator or a producer, or someone who was more of a visionary. And you can when you take the whole chart together, you can really start getting a picture of who the person is. But any one part of it is not, I guess I would say it's not to be taken dogmatically, like, oh, this is what I am, or this is what I'm limited to, or what I'm going to be. It's more of talking about our potential and how our energies just work in a certain pattern, certain frequencies, and our life force is set a certain way.
And in human design, there are 5 types, correct?
There are 4 major types, and then there's a subtype, which is the 5th type. I'll start with the first type, which is the type that actually kind of started everything or kicks everything off, which is called manifestors. And manifestors are roughly 10% of the population. They're the ones who are here to initiate things, to start things, to have a vision, and ultimately to kick something off in order to manifest it or bring it into form. Most of our population, roughly 70%, is a type called generator. And generators are the ones who are here to use their energy doing something creative, producing something that they love, that lights them up. And, if it wasn't for generators, this world probably wouldn't exist as it is. The generators are the ones who create and maintain this world. The third type is called a projector, and that's my type. It's roughly 20% of the population, and projectors are here essentially to focus on others, to be a guide for others, to go deep into systems and study, but really they're all about relationship and the other. And then I could go on. I have a lot to say about projectors, but we'll continue with the last type. And the last type is called a reflector. And reflector is about 1% of the population, and they are very different than the other 3 types. And I will get to the 5th type. But the reflector, if you were to look at their body graph, they have a common characteristic, and there is nothing colored in. There's nothing is actually defined. And so they're very receptive in a lot of ways, and they're really designed to kind of reflect and sample their environment, and ultimately to kind of stand outside of everything that's going on, and to essentially kind of be a point of reference, or even kind of an objective observer or judge of the health or the well-being of any group that they're in.
So that's actually very interesting. I know maybe a handful of reflectors, and they are fascinating people, very different. And I can see how they're affected by their energy, or by the energy of the environment. So my question to you would be, is 100% of their reaction a reflection of the environment, or is some of that reaction part of their own stuff, their own patterning? They must have patterning too.
Yes, both. What's unique about the reflectors is this gets a little bit in the weeds, but they don't have channel definition, which means there's really nothing fixed and consistent in their own experience. And so what is consistent for them is constant change. And they have this ability to go in and out of situations, groups, interactions, and just kind of take on a little bit of the energy around without being completely affected by it. Their auric type, they say, is kind of like Teflon. It's like they can meet it, but it doesn't really stick. And so you like you said, you see a lot of reflectors who are just very unique, very different. They do have fixed characteristics in their design, but the ones I know are all very different, and they're constantly changing. It's just this constant process of change for reflectors.
And if a reflector is in a really unhealthy environment, I've seen them like almost totally shut down, or like it affects them so much.
Yeah, they're very group and community oriented, and kind of true to the name reflector, they literally will reflect the health or lack of health, or well-being or lack of well-being of the group that they're associated with. It's kind of like almost like a canary in a coal mine type of analogy there. And at the same time, the thing that surprised me the most when I started meeting and working with reflectors was how resilient they can be at the same time. They don't really follow the normal rules of the three other types. They have energy that I wouldn't expect they would have, and a resiliency. It's said that the reflectors are more of a lunar type, where the other three types, the manifestors, generators, and projectors, are more solar types. So you can almost think of like a reflector as being more yin, like pure yin in a way.
Interesting. And what about the fifth type?
The fifth type is a generator, but it's a manifesting generator. So you could think of the fifth type as kind of a hybrid between a pure generator and a manifestor. Now, where some of the debate happens is this person a generator or not? And my current view is that they are a generator because they still have to operate in response, which is the strategy of a generator, is to wait to respond. Once that manifesting generator is in response, in other words, life has brought something to you, or you've met with life directly in some way, then the manifesting generator tends to move really fast and be able to bring things into form and create very quickly, where a pure generator would probably have to stick with more of a step-by-step response process.
Wonderful, wonderful. John, would you like to share your website or your contact information?
Sure. My consulting and personal practice website is called metamorphichumandesign.com. And that's where I offer sessions, human design readings, and I have a lot of information about the system. And there is another site that I have. It's called the Human Design Collective, and the URL is humandesigncollective.com. And that's I would say it's a community website meant for people who are interested in going deeper into this knowledge and exploring it with other people, kind of in a supportive, high frequency environment. And that might be interesting to people. I have a lot of blog posts and content up there that's free and might be worth checking out.
Perfect, perfect. So thank you for listening to this week's episode of Exploring the Mystical Side of Life. You can find us on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, and Anchor.fm. Come and visit me at thoughtchange.com. Pick up your copy of Learning to Listen. By the way, one of my gates in my human design is the deep listening gate. So I'm a great guide to teach you how to listen to your own innate wisdom. That's it for this week. We'll see you again next time. Bye for now. Watch for part 2 of my conversation with John Cole, Discovering Yourself Through Human Design.